Hey, it's Brandon. Welcome to Armchair Radio. This week we have Brian Hawkins and a return visit from Jason Harrington. Brian is an animator and filmmaker working with French, Cajun, and Creole cultures. We had a really wonderful discussion. I hope you enjoy.
So Brian, man, I hear you're working on quite the extensive art project.
Yeah, it's been going on for a few years longer than I thought it would go. But I've been working on some animations about these folktales that were told in Missouri by a bunch of French-speaking people who came into the area in the late 1600s. They didn't really settle in Missouri until the middle of the 1700s, the 18th century. But like most of the population that was French there assimilated, once the big wave of Americans came into the region after the Louisiana Purchase. But in some of these smaller towns, they were so isolated that the French language survived until the 20th century, and all of the like folk tales and things that go along with that. So it's been pretty fun to dive into.
That's really interesting because, South Louisiana, I'm Cajun as can be, and most of us down here are, and I would have never guessed that they have Cajun folk out in Missouri. It seems very Midwest to, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. It's not, I guess they're not Cajun because they didn't come with the same, wave of refugees after that war in, 1755 or so. So they called themselves Creoles because it's like that was the term for people who were born here, that were of French ancestry or Spanish ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
And so their language is like similar to Cajun in that it's Cajun French in that it's the same sort of French that was brought over in the 1700s and just kind of was very conservative. Whenever you have a small community like that, they hold on to their culture and their language in a way that if you have a bunch of people around you that speak the same language, it's not the same mindset, I guess.
Right. Well, there's a, I don't guess it's really a debate, but there is a different way that people talk about it here. And one of the things that's, I think is great. It's like the big push for it. There's quite a few different groups who are kind of fighting to preserve the language, but they're really calling it, Louise, for exactly the reason you were just stating, that it's such a combination of all of these different groups coming together from the Haitian immigrants in the Caribbean, and then even the native indigenous people, and French from France and Acadia or Nova Scotia, and so it's like they the Louisiana State University, LSU, in Baton Rouge, there's a really great program. Have you seen they created a dictionary, basically an academic dictionary?
Yeah, I think so. Of Louisiana French.
Yeah, correct, exactly.
And then there are a bunch of people doing Creole, like Louisiana Creole and Haitian Creole dictionaries too, which are pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's fun. And Missouri was Upper Louisiana back then, so
right, that makes sense.
They were upstate Louisiana.
It's kind of weird.
So it's funny because, growing up here, I always kind of associated Creole with people from New Orleans. So I never really understood the exact definition of a Creole. I figured it was just more melting pot, and we were just more French then we kind of started breeding with the natives. So we have a lot of Native American crossover.
Mm-hmm. Like a lot of researchers who write about the French colony, and the descendants from that colony will use the word Creole to refer to the people who aren't Cajun, who aren't Canadian, who are living in what was Louisiana, at one point. And for them, if you think about it, there was a difference between people who were born in France and came to North America to settle versus their children, right? And so the children of people who were born in France or Spain that were born in North America were considered Creole, just as a way to sort of differentiate them from like the first generation that came over.
Interesting.
There was this community, I guess, with a bunch of other minorities, in Louisiana. So like there were Creoles of color, and like they spoke French usually, but sometimes, Haitian Creole or Louisiana Creole. And so it just kind of took on all of these different meanings, I guess, or like shades of meaning over the years because of all of that.
So where are you originally from?
I'm like, this is my childhood home.
Oh, okay.
So I'm
Right here?
Kansas. Yeah, Kansas
like
City.
right over there.
Yeah, like right here.
Okay, I was wondering, like, how you got interested in like the Cajun culture and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know. It was like kind of weird how it happened. It just was sort of a roundabout process. I was really into rag jazz. I made a lot of art. I played a lot of music from that genre, I guess you could say. And it's another local thing. Like it kind of grew up in St. Louis and Sedalia, Missouri, and Kansas City too. And so I was interested in that. And then like started learning French when I was in grad school. I just needed like something to keep me from going insane, like just working on my thesis all the time. And so I studied abroad in Belgium for a few weeks and thought, like, it was pretty fun to talk to people in Flemish, what little I knew, like I could get into trouble. And I thought, even though I'd studied Spanish in high school, like I never really like kept up with it. And I thought, well, maybe I'll learn French just for something to do. And so that then led to like, because ragtime kind of developed here, early jazz developed in New Orleans. And so there's like a lot of mixture between like early jazz and French culture in New Orleans. I mean, predominantly like Creoles of color were the people that were playing jazz, yeah. Right? And so that like opened up a whole door, because that's not like generally what you hear when you listen to like early traditional jazz is like people singing in French. But that's where a lot of that came from. Like there's a really great record, I think it's Danny Barker's band, Jazz à la Creole, and it's like just all of these French songs that are like would fit right into what like Louis Armstrong was playing. And so that kind of led me in that direction, and I started thinking about the influence musically. And then I graduated, and because I make animations, I was like thinking, well, maybe there's some other like local history that is interesting to work with, or like folk tales. And I just literally stumbled on a book that said like the French folklore of Missouri in the university library, and thought that's pretty interesting. And that's kind of how it started, was just with that book, really. And I knew enough French that I could read it. That's a long answer. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, hey, it's awesome. A podcast, man. The longer you talk, the better it is. So what's your project about, and how long have you been working on it?
It really did start with that book that I found, which is by a guy who's a francophone, and he was really interested in North American French culture and language. And he did a study in the 1930s. He had heard about this group of people living in Old Mines, Missouri. And he came down and tried to get some of the folk tales that they told. 73, I think, folk tales that were told to him by two people primarily in the 1930s. And the language was already dying out at that point. They were like kind of looking for people that were fluent and also were like well versed in these stories. And so this guy was asking around for a couple of years, and like no one would really help him. Like it was just a real small community, and they didn't trust outsiders for good reason. Right. And even though he spoke French, it was different, and so like there were misunderstandings, and it was kind of difficult at first, I'm sure. But finally someone told him like, look, you need to stop like hanging around the church, like go to the like general store and talk to Pete, and like that guy can tell you who knows the good stories. And so that's what he did. I mean, they're basically, a lot of them are fairy tales. Some of them are really similar to the kind of folk tales that are told in Louisiana, with like Bouki P. Le Pen, the Mr. Rabbit and the Tardal, things like that. And then there are like, Little Red Riding Hood, or the woman whose hands were cut off, or things like that are like
All those classics, right?
Yeah, the whole.
Those time passers. I mean, they didn't have iPads and shit back then. They had to do something, and so they just told stories.
Yeah. Well, and the old men would tell it. Like they were the ones that would tell the stories for the most part. It was the older members of the community, and it was kind of competitive. It was weird. It was like, I mean, yeah, it's like TV now, or it's like being a really good musician. Like those were really important skills to have. Like you needed good fiddlers and you needed good storytellers.
Well, most people wouldn't read a whole lot or write even. I know, like my grandmother, she never really learned to write. She kind of did.
Yeah, my grandma's the same way, actually. She doesn't know how to read or write.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And so, even more, more reason to. The only thing you're going to get is the newspaper, and that's not going to make a lot of sense.
And that's just 2 generations away. That's not that long ago.
Yeah, it's exactly that. Even if they could read and write, it would all be in English. Like, it was such a small community. They were surrounded on every side.
So was there like in Louisiana, there was like a boarding school era where they tried to get the language out through schooling. And then like my father would always tell me whenever he'd come home, he'd get beaten if he spoke English because his parents didn't speak English. But then if he went to school and spoke French, he'd get beaten over there for speaking French. And so it was kind of no matter damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation. Is that similar to how it was in Missouri or?
Yeah, exactly. I think the problem in Missouri is that it happened earlier here, and that's why the language ended up dying out to a greater extent than it did in Louisiana. I mean, it was a severe case of like...
Well, whenever you said the 30s, I was thinking that's earlier than I would think.
Yeah, it started here in the 20s. There was like a compulsory education bill passed, so all the kids had to go to public school. They were trying to force them to assimilate. And so they would get beaten at school if they spoke French. They internalized a lot of the feelings of inferiority, I think, that came along with that.
Same here.
Yeah.
You hear that a lot. Like, that's why parents wouldn't teach their kids, because it was why would you want to learn that? It's just going to get you into.
Yeah, we always kind of felt like it was us against them, the rest of America. The Cajun French language is dying here, too. I think recently it's kind of gotten a little bit of a surge. But I know they have a couple of organizations that are nonprofits built specifically around trying to get the younger people. I mean, I'm 40, but I know the curse words, and that's about it.
Right.
I'm taking a French class right now at UL, the college in Lafayette. It's just an after hours kind of thing. And it's taught by somebody he knows Parisian French very well, but he's a native speaker and still has lots of family who speak fluently. You really learn that, it's an 8-week class, so you can't really learn a whole lot, but the, really makes the distinctions between the fundamental differences between what would be considered this type of French versus...
Like my dad would tell me that it would be hard for him to have a conversation with just a Parisian French-speaking person because the dialects are really that different. Like some of the words that they would say would mean something different in, the Cajun French.
They say about 70% is the same.
Well, you get the wrong 30%, and
Well, of course. One of the interesting things I've heard about why it's hung out longer here is just by nature of being in the marsh and the interstate system. If you draw a line over the interstate system, it traces all of the coast and then cuts back and forth across the continental United States. At the boot of Louisiana, where it's marsh, you have 90 miles or so where really no traffic came through. And there was really not much reason to come down here. Matter of fact, I was on Cow Island, right, this past weekend. Well, it's not an island, but it is surrounded by marshland, which means, it would be a long time before there were good roads to there was not a lot of reason to get down here. Right. So there were these, so you could live until you were 30-something years old in the 50s or 60s, having never had to learn to speak English.
Right.
It's really crazy how I-10 is this symbiotic border of Louisiana. You go above I-10 and it's more like redneck or hillbilly, and we're like coon-ass and Cajun.
Yeah, and I know growing up where we did, I think we all grew up. The three of us that grew up in Louisiana, I think we grew up in the bottom half of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, 10 miles from Cow Island.
Well, my mom would always tell me that, anytime I talk about going to see my uncle in Shreveport or whatever, she's like, oh, that's not really Louisiana. Like she's
Right,
like, oh,
yeah.
technically it is. That's not Louisiana. But then she'd also say, New Orleans, that's not Louisiana. That's not Louisiana. Those are crazy
That's not
people.
gumbo.
Whatever. It's like, yeah, it's just, it's gotta be that one spot.
It does seem like there's a huge difference between New Orleans, though, and like the country around where you guys were born and raised.
Yeah, it's certainly like three major distinctions between that North Louisiana, Southwest, and then the New Orleans region.
And a bunch of assumptions that go along with each one.
Oh, absolutely.
You're like part of a group identity.
In the last 10 years or so, but the biggest difference in South and North Louisiana is North Louisiana is predominantly Baptist, South Louisiana is predominantly Catholic. Yeah. And along with the Catholicism comes the kind of the acceptance of a lot of the traditions and things that came from Santeria and from the Haitian population and all of these kind of things. So you can dance and you can have parties and you can drink wine and you can do all these things that when you're Baptist in Leesville, you can't do. And so it's a drastically different effect on the culture as a whole. Mardi Gras is Mardi Gras because it's the day before Lent. It's
right.
It's
When have you guys run the Mardi Gras?
They didn't really do that in Vermilion Parish a whole lot. That was kind of a Eunice and Mamu thing. Yeah. And they still do it out there. There's a few other ones that have popped up, but that could read the Mardi Gras he's talking about, Chad?
I didn't even find out about that till I was much older.
Yeah, me too. Same.
Mardi Gras was just going to the square in Abbeville and go Fado Do and fall asleep on the ice chest until Dad's ready to go home. That's Mardi Gras. No, but that's interesting. Like, I guess I didn't realize Baptists not approving of dance. That's just it's a big factor into why South Louisiana. I mean, Jesus, we have a festival. Like, we probably have 2 festivals every weekend.
Right, Frog Festival, Rice Festival.
Because Catholicism is. It's just way more lax. You're able to drink and dance and party and whatnot. You just, go ask for forgiveness tomorrow.
That's totally it, though, man. I mean, it makes me think about the financial incentives to those 2 ways of thinking, too, because most of the guys I grew up with ended up going offshore and they made a lot of money, but then they didn't save any of it because I want what I want today and, we'll figure out tomorrow. That's kind of the attitude. It's, well, I got to work my ass off. I might as well enjoy my ass off and then go back to work. And then before you know it, it's like somehow they don't have all that money that they've earned, And Shreveport, my uncle there is doing all right. And then partially it's his mentality. He doesn't need a lot.
Is he in the oil field also?
Working at a plant. I think he did the automotive. He was a painter. And so he painted all the vehicles for like 20 years or 30 years. And so he was just about to retire and they shut down the plant.
Oh, wow.
And he was shitting bricks for a while. Like, man, am I going to get my retirement? Like,
Damn.
But he made it. He got his retirement. So I'm totally generalizing, but
right.
I did notice the culture is different. If you got money, why not spend it?
And I think, a lot of times, guilty of this myself, like you assume that it's going to last forever. And you don't really recognize that, tomorrow oil can drop to negative dollars a barrel.
Right.
You don't think about that. You're just like, oh, well, I'll spend $2,000 today because I'm getting another $4,000 Friday.
Right.
I'll tell you what, though, I think something that's a change that's caused. So like back in the day, like all of our parents and grandparents, they grew up raising chickens and rabbits and having a garden, and there's like that's a whole part of the culture is like this self-sustaining kind of insular kind of ability, and that stops whenever the essentially the men in the family all start working 21/7 because you have a garden when you're not home for 3 weeks a month.
Yeah.
But with that comes a sizable amount of income, so you don't need to grow your own stuff, right?
Right.
You're providing in a different way.
And I think a lot of the cultural shift is, well, there's a million, I'm sure more than a million reasons for it, but I think that's certainly a part of it.
Oh, absolutely, man.
Whenever I was like a kid, my dad and his brother still would, do a boucherie every year, still raise pigs and do all those kinds of things. So I was able to, at least experience that enough to see it. But then I also, not long after I was, 6 or 8 years old, in the mid 80s, late 80s and stuff, is whenever all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Older people in my family that didn't go offshore or anything, because they were 60 or 70. They all kept the chicken yard and raised ducks and raised guineas and all that, and always had big gardens. And that was just a part of, that's just how people lived.
Yeah.
You definitely don't see very much of that at all now. So it's like everybody growing a little cute garden for the sake of growing some stuff, but not enough to realistically feed yourself for a year.
Yeah, I think the pandemic in some ways has kind of like woken some people up to the reality of like how nice it is to have a garden,
right,
that you can rely on. And so I think that it seems like it's been real popular this year, but it's not going to last. As soon as things go back to normal, people are going to go back to work, and there's just not enough time, I think, in the way that our society's built right now to like be home and weed and stay on top of all of that, because it's exhausting, really. Like,
at the end of the day, you end up with 4 or 5 different things to eat.
I know.
Whereas,
oh great, I have enough beans for like 2 weeks now.
But I'm not hungry for beans, so I'm going to go out and get some McDonald's.
Right.
Yeah, I think, just being able to slow down and kind of take time away from, I guess, work life or, common life or whatever, definitely changed a lot of people. But like you said, as soon as you get back, to the grind of things, you're right back in the same place. It's going to be easy to just, forget about it and just keep going like we've been doing for the last 40 years,
Well, and I mean, people want that. I mean, it's like, I don't think anyone really wants to be
tilling the field.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know what size garden you're talking about, but
I think that we can't go too far over to that side of things, and it's like, I think that's the part that kind of, I guess, what you're getting at about that reconnection with,
Yeah, just slowing down and like catching up with what's actually going on instead of just keep going. Well, a lot of jobs aren't, very manual, but it's mental, and so you sit in a cubicle all day and you typing on a computer and you're making decisions and talking to people, and you get home and you just want to doing podcasts. So you get home and you just want to chill out, watch a little bit of TV, turn your mind off for a minute and go to bed. And look, I am the first person that pays for convenience, so by all means, it's just a different way.
Earlier, Jason, whenever you're saying that everybody was kind of, it wasn't even so much a pride thing, it was just like an identity thing. Like, yeah, I got a garden, of course I do. Of course I got all these chickens, of course. How else would you live? It's like just a given. Mm-hmm. And now there's such a sweeter version and liquid version in money, where it's like, well, yeah, okay, you're providing with the chickens and this and that, but we can give you $100,000 a year to do what we need you to do, and you can provide so much more than all these chickens, so it kind of, that's how it's almost like it's a trick, because it's a cruel trick on a people that really appreciate that, what that is, to
well, it makes you dependent on something outside of yourself, and I think that's
with the idea that you're providing.
That's different.
And I think that's what's kind of gotten us in trouble and kind of in the place where we're at is now you have a few people trying to provide everything for the nation, so instead of having, a town that has a guy that grows corn and a guy that has a cow and they all kind of trade within each other, you have one family that is producing all this corn, which means, now you have to start using pesticides because you have all this land to take care of. And like, I've really been thinking lately that our food crisis, like we need to bring food out of a globalization mindset. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even if we just bring it down to like regional, we can still have all the same things we need. Now, granted, you might not be able to have a watermelon in December.
Passion fruit.
You know what I mean? But like, maybe it'll be sweeter when you have it in the summer because you couldn't have it in the winter.
Just a matter of changing expectation.
Well, yeah, and I think also infrastructure. Like, it's just been really difficult because things have grown to such an extent that that's how food is shipped around and it's how it's effectively distributed.
Oh, it's $1 billion industry.
Much of it getting wasted just because, like, the supply chain wasn't sorted out for any sort of change, right, to be feasible. And so there was a lot of food that was sort of wasted while people were going hungry.
Yeah.
And I think what you guys are talking about is like, yeah, having communities that are sustainable, where like if you get cut off from the rest of the world, like you're not just going to have corn to eat, you know, like you have a variety
or you know what, maybe you do, and maybe that's okay because maybe that's sustainable. And I think like that's the mindset that we need to kind of go forward with, in not always having to have all the options available to us. That's we're spoiled like motherfuckers, dude. Like, you know, like we have 1,000 options for everything. And I think it's unnecessary. And I think, you know, there's some psychology behind it, but, you know, the more options you have, the less happier you are kind of situation, you know?
Yeah.
So there's an example that we're living with here that we haven't taken into the modern era, and it's crawfish season. It's like when it's not crawfish season, you just can't get crawfish.
Right.
I mean, you can buy some frozen crawfish that from China, but they're not the same.
No.
You know? And it's like, but in a sense, it does kind of, I mean, our experience with crawfish is it's like, it's like we have these times when it's like, you know, it's the good time of year to get them.
Right.
You know, and it's like,
and it's awesome when that time comes around, and when it's not around, you're like, pooh, I can't wait to get some crawfish.
You know, the NFL kind of does it to us too. You know, by having an off season, it makes you want to see the season, I guess.
Like television is kind of the similar, like back in the day, like summertime, like we were always outside, and, you know, I kind of thought about it the other day, and it's like, but there was nothing on TV during the summer. Like all the shows started in the fall, you know what I mean? But now there's no like schedule. There's no fall TV. It's literally everything is on demand. And I think I consume more of it now, you know what I mean? Because there's just more options.
There's always something you can watch.
That's that Radiohead song. We deserve everything all of the time.
Right.
Do you find with the folk tales that you're writing about, or is there like a style, or what am I trying to say? Like they cover a wide like genres, or like is it they all kind of have like similarities?
No, it's like, I mean, it's like TV. You've got your true crime, you've got your gardening shows, the Kids Hour. It's pretty varied. A lot of them are more religious, you know, than the standard, I guess, like fairy tales that we would kind of think about. I'm working on one that I like just because nobody really seems to tell it in our contemporary world. Like you just don't come across it very often, but it is a standard type from a lot of different cultures. And it's about a farmer whose name's Little John. Little John's kind of the stock character for a lot of these stories. And he lives next to the devil, and the devil doesn't know how to farm, but he'd like to. And so he comes over and asks Little John, hey, do you think, you know, this year we could work together? I could, you know, maybe we could sow a field of wheat, something like that. He says, oh, yeah, that's not a problem. Come on over, you know, and when it's time, we'll go and we'll sow the field of wheat. And so they do. And then whenever it's time to harvest, Big Devil doesn't know obviously what he's doing, and so he asks Little John, "Oh, to cut it, and then we thresh it, and then we can separate it, and all of this." And he says, "That's just a lot of work. I'd really like to just take my half now, if that's okay with you." And he's like, "Okay, like if you have some ideas, let me know." He says, "You know what? I'll just take everything that grows under the ground, and you can have the rest." And so Little John says, like, I don't know. I mean, that seems like a pretty good deal to me. And so he takes all of the, you know, wheat and the straw, and the devil takes the roots. And he's not very happy with the roots. And so he comes and blames Little John for stealing all of the wheat. And Little John says, I don't know, you made a bad decision, you know, don't blame me. And it happens again and again, and with like different crops, right? And so like they sow a bunch of turnips. And the devil decides, like, you're not going to get me this time. I'm going to take everything that grows above the ground. And so we just ends up with the greens. And then eventually, you know, the farmer takes off and goes to live with the king for a while. And he's really pissed because the devil had, I don't know if I can curse on this podcast, but I'm assuming.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. So he's pretty pissed because he's been accusing him of being a thief. And so he says, you know what? Someday I'm going to steal you, Big Devil. I'm going to take everything that you own. And so he does. He comes back and he steals the devil's violin. He steals the devil's lamp. The devil has like this sort of like portable sun that he can place like wherever he wants for light and to dry the laundry. And so Little John takes that. And then finally he takes this little bowl with golden horns. But then the devil doesn't really have anything left to steal. And so he's still not really satisfied. And he sits there and thinks, well, what can I do? And he goes and he talks to the blacksmith. And he says, hey, do you think you could build me like a big cage on, like on a carriage? He says, yeah, I could do that. And so
no questions asked. Sure. Big enough to fit a man or a devil?
And so he dresses up in a disguise, borrows the king's horses. He has like 16 horses or whatever, and hitches them up to this big cage. And he leaves the door open so it makes a lot of noise. And he drives around and circles around the devil's house in his disguise as this old man. Well, the devil's pretty interested in what's going on. And so he comes out and he asks, he's like, what are you doing with that big cage there? He says, oh, I don't know if you've heard of this guy, Little John, but he's a real menace. He's taken everything from me that I own, and I'm trying to catch him. The problem is he's a real big guy. He's a big, strong guy, and I just don't know if this cage is going to be strong enough to hold him. You look like a big, strong guy. How about you get in that cage and see if you can get out? We'll see if it'll work. And Big Devil's thrilled because, he says, oh, my God, this guy's taken everything I own, too, so I'm happy to help you. And so he gets in and gets trapped, and so then that's the end of the story. Like, goes and just won't let the devil out of the cage.
That's a fantastic story, though.
It's a weird story, and like the longer you think about it, there's kind of a lot going on. You got like,
Yeah.
Well, first off, you have somebody that's like not afraid to steal from the devil. I mean, that's that's pretty brazen. But just listening to the story, it's like, I guess I never thought about it, but like I'm really curious as like how do these stories come to be? I understand, they're passed on from generation to generation, but like somebody had to start it, so I'm sure there at some point there was some truth somewhere in there, just kind of like when you tell a story in a circle in everybody's ear, and like by the end of the circle, it's like a whole different story. It's just really interesting to like be able to go back and see like where it actually formed from.
It is. They do actually like a similar analysis for folktales and myths that they do for living creatures to like try to trace back the evolutionary history of different myths and figure out what cultures they might have come from, when they might have developed, and then like all the different changes they pick up along the way. This one, like I said, is really old, and it has like a few different elements. The nice thing about them is that they're pretty modular. So like it's kind of where, if you know a bunch of them and you have a bunch of kids around, you can kind of keep the fun alive, all night pretty much, like until people fall asleep, because you can kind of set up expectations by maybe leading people to believe that your story is going to go in one direction, but then take a left turn, This one I think is interesting because there's also like all of this lore in old mines, at least, about like, and I don't think it's that unique. A lot of it's just based on like the almanac and like, you plant certain crops during certain times of the month. If the moon is in a certain phase, then you want to plant things that grow under the ground, and in another phase, things that grow above the ground. And I think that in a lot of ways, like that kind of has an impact on these folktales where like the devil is sort of this ogre that just doesn't understand like the laws of nature and like how agriculture works, right? Like he's sort of uncivilized in that way.
Yeah.
And like, and also greedy and mean and like lashes out in anger, when he feels wronged. There's obviously like the sort of Christian element, but then this sort of deeper, more sort of primal idea of the devil, I think, too, that's kind of coming through.
So the French up there, you had mentioned, a lot of the stories kind of come from religion. What's the main religion up there?
Oh, they're Catholic.
Catholic?
I mean,
Okay.
they're all they're all super Catholic. It's standard Catholicism. And I mean, it's the same thing with like the Mardi Gras season. They moved theirs up to New Year's for whatever reason. It was called La Guillonnée.
What reason
but
do you
it's
give
the
for
same
that?
because it's fucking cold and you can't do anything. But like, it's just really, really cold. I mean, you can't grow anything. You've already butchered all of your animals. It's probably like the ground's too cold really to even mine. Like I don't know. Maybe I'm bullshitting, but I think it's not ideal.
That kind of thinking is kind of what led him that way. But it's very interesting how, all of a sudden you could change tradition just because it doesn't fit your schedule.
Oh, totally. And I mean, it's possible that La Guillonnée existed in Louisiana as well at some point, which would have been the New Year's version of Mardi Gras, because those two ceremonies are like on either end of the season. And Mardi Gras is just sort of the last gasp, whereas La Guillonnée was kind of the kickoff for the season. And so it's the same thing. Disguise themselves and go and beg for food and sing a song and dance. And then like different families would say like, yeah, you can have a certain number of our chickens. And then they would like have balls basically every week.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like New Orleans. I want to say it's maybe the second week of January is when they start parades. And they have like a parade like every week somewhere. They're not all the, Rio or like the big ones or anything, but, they literally start celebrating Mardi Gras 2 months in advance.
Right. Yeah. So it's the same thing. It just like, they just moved the big date kind of up, and,
yeah, they just extended it. They didn't change it really.
Right. Right.
Just
Exactly.
more.
Yeah.
We have more alcohol. We need to drink it.
Right.
And they still do it, and like you can go to St. Genevieve on New Year's Eve, which is a town in Missouri, and they still sing the song. No one speaks French there anymore, but they learned it like phonetically from these records that their grandparents made, and
that's fantastic.
So does any of this tie into the animation project you're working on? Like, are you focusing on like a specific folktale? Or
yeah, I mean, I had to weed it down because there's so many, and it takes a long time to animate things.
You're not like animating like a lot of people today animate. You're like hand painting these oil paintings, right?
Yeah, they're watercolors, but they're
watercolors, right?
Yeah, all hand painted, and like it's flat, but a movable thing, that you can modify, and just take one picture after the next.
Well, dude, I gotta tell you, that is super impressive. Like when I saw it, I mean, I just figured I didn't really think twice about it. I just figured it was a digital animation. And then when he told me that, he's like, yeah, man, he watercolored like each one of these. I'm like, holy shit, dude. Honestly, I was like, why? That just seems like I can't even imagine the amount of work. The piece that I saw, I think, was like 5 minutes long.
Yeah.
30 frames a second. That's crazy.
I do 12, but it is like still a lot of frames per second, and it's like, I mean, it's not going to trick a video gamer who's used to like 60 frames per second or whatever, but like for normal human eyes, I think, it's fast enough.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even notice it. Like, it felt natural,
Oh, that's good to hear. So I'm animating a couple. One of the reasons that I wanted to do this project, I guess in the first place, is that there was a lot of news coverage in 2015, 2016 about these people who were trying to save the French dialect of Missouri. There was a couple of young people who were studying linguistics who started teaching classes, and they were in St. Louis. And so I went and visited them. I was pretty impressed with their just motivation, I guess, and general like we can do it attitude. But they weren't from old mines, and so it was weird because there was no one left who was a native speaker that they could have really learned the dialect from, and they just kind of started teaching classes, and they're like 20 something. It's like you couldn't have spent long learning it, But I still think it's good because it brings attention to the community. And it's like such a small thing, and like who's going to call someone out if it's not quite right?
And especially if they're trying to help. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And
yeah.
So I don't know. I I think it's a good thing ultimately, but it was frustrating, I think, for people in the community, and also frustrating for linguists too, like who've spent a lot of time documenting the language, because it wasn't
accurate, right?
French too, but I don't speak it. I'm not a native speaker. It's not the same, right? And so I don't know. But anyway, I went and met them, and then talking to more people in the community, they're like, look, people say that there's nothing remaining of any of this, but we have like hundreds of hours of tape that were recorded in the 70s. Plus there were wax cylinders that were recorded in the 30s. There are audio references that we can go back to. And by using some of those folktales from those tapes, I thought, it's going to at least give people an idea of what French sounded like in this area. And it'll help, like, if people want to continue teaching it and continue learning it, it's just better to have, like, access to those resources in a way that's kind of fun to engage with. And so, yeah, the folktale you saw was one that was told in 1980 by Pete Bouyer. And Pete is actually the guy that took that professor around in the 1930s to introduce him to different storytellers. So Pete has like a pretty good connection, you know, with all of this. Yeah. And the weird thing was that story that he told is called Chascarrit. It's not in the book. And I thought that's kind of weird, because it was the first one that I kind of like came upon when I was doing my research, and I was expecting to hear, you know, some of the standard ones, and like, it's just a real weird folktale again, this one's about a hunter. And then like the more I sort of did more research, that folktale lined up with historical events too. So like in 1694, this French trapper, he was a voyageur, just kind of all around scoundrel of a guy, known for his debauchery throughout the entire area. He I guess, I mean, he was doing well for himself. And so the Kaskaskia chief wanted this guy to marry his daughter, just to form an alliance, right, with a French guy and to kind of have stronger bonds. The problem was his daughter, Marie Ruenza, had already converted to Catholicism. And this is like 1694. She wanted to be a nun and remain a virgin. And that's a problem.
I mean, if you want to be my wife, that's a big deal.
And so she held out for a while. And it's interesting because the Jesuit priest who was like stationed there wrote a lot about her, because she was one of his favorite converts, just being very devout. And he told the dad, like, look, like, I'm not going to say anything either way. It's her decision, right? And eventually she decided to marry the French guy because she felt like he was such a bad character that she could be a good influence on him. And
man.
And then,
the oldest story in history right there. Right. I'll fix him.
She's like, I know I can do it. I can save him. And and she did. He like she was very good. She like got him to come back to the faith. And then like her parents ended up converting. And so like the Kaskaskia tribe became very close, obviously, with the French people living in the region, because of that marriage. She demanded a Catholic wedding, which was just really out of character for French Indian marriages in North America.
I mean, hypothetically speaking, do you think, maybe like one of the ways she got him to convert was because she was holding out? And she was like, hey, look, man, you come convert and
possibly
you get a hit at these digs.
It's possible. It's hard to say. With a lot of marriages for 300-400 years ago, there was an age gap. Particularly think he would have probably been terribly attractive to her. And so, I mean, I think it was actually a really strategic move on her part. And it went well for her. She had a couple kids with him, and then he died and she married another French guy and had, I think, another 6 kids or so. And they were all considered like legitimate children because of this Catholic wedding. So the whole area was pretty much populated by people who were sort of half French, half Native American. And then later, more French people immigrated from Canada or from Louisiana or from France directly. That was kind of the beginning of that whole
Do you see a lot of the indigenous words in the French spoken in Missouri?
There's a bit like Wawaron is the bullfrog.
Bullfrog. Yeah, we say that here too.
there's Tac Tac, which for popcorn, but I don't think that's probably, I don't know. People have suspected that Tac Tac is native, of native origin. There's also, they say maïs for corn, but I mean, it's kind of, that's standard French now. I mean, it's just the name for corn. But I not a whole lot, honestly, seems to have had a huge impact on the French that was spoken, mostly, I guess, for plants and animals.
Right. Like we have the matter going from mosquito.
Yeah.
Is not the Parisian word for it. And you're right, it's mostly plants and animal things, which makes sense if that's who they were learning about, the local native species and stuff from.
I haven't looked too much into the language.
Earlier you were talking about that story you told about there's Little John.
Yeah, Little John.
It makes me wonder if that's got to be the same Little Johnny that's in like The Devil Went Down to Georgia, right?
Maybe.
Oh yeah,
because it's the devil. It's the same.
Yeah, when he stole his violin, that's exactly what I thought.
Chad, you remember? I'm sure y'all did too. Right? We'd always hear Little Johnny was always the character of stories.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it was always this mischievous kid.
He's not evil, but
like he
gets himself into trouble.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. Yeah. Like there's one in a lot of the French songs from here. Didn't
he have two wives?
That's it. It's always Jopite a deux femmes. Jopite's got two women. And it's always a story about how he found himself in some kind of little bind on account of, being at the dance, and his wife showed up and he's over there dancing with somebody
Somehow
else.
He's the victim.
Right. But it's like with the spoken word nature of the stories, you could see how it's almost like Spider-Man, right? Except it's just Little Johnny. And just everybody's able to kind of add their own, they have to, because you're not going to remember everything word for word, but you get the general idea, and then the legend around this character just kind of grows out of it.
Yeah.
That's a neat kind of, in like Appalachian fiddle culture, there's a Sis Draper. And she's supposedly she's the devil's daughter. And she travels around and she seduces all the men and all the, with her fiddling, because she's beautiful and she can play. It's just neat, I think, to find those different characters like that.
Yeah. That story, is that where the devil's fiddle came from? Like, where did the devil get a fiddle?
I think the devil's had a fiddle for a long time.
Oh yeah, I guess he was like the musical person in heaven before God was like, later.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
Who knows where I read this? I think that he's actually associated, like the fiddle is associated with the devil,
but the violin isn't,
right? The violin, the fiddle.
But the violin is different than the fiddle, right? Even though it's the same thing, it's like feels
it's
different.
Differently. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it depends where you're standing. But yeah, I've just always, for whatever reason, beyond my consciousness, associated the devil with the fiddle. Obviously the song, but there's more than that. So it's curious how that association, and I don't have the answer. I'm just
a lot of different, like the Baptist thing, right? So that would have been a big part of Baptist, is that the music that's coming out, that kind of music,
that's devil music,
is leading you to sin, essentially.
Yeah.
So as soon as you
start, point, it wasn't like all music.
Well, yeah, I mean, it still is in some places.
Can't dance, you can't. Well, wasn't that what Dirty Dancing was about? Was it Dirty Dancing?
I mean,
the one where the guy goes to that place where nobody can dance, and he just wants to dance.
Is that? I didn't realize that it took place in
Is that what it was? It was a religious community.
I think so.
Or Baptist. Okay.
That's the one with Bacon, right? Kevin Bacon.
No,
it's Patrick Swayze, ball.
Patrick Swayze.
Yeah. He does the little flying dance thing.
Yeah, okay, I guess that was him. I could have swore that.
You thinking about maybe Footloose, maybe?
No, it was Footloose. Okay, Footloose was the one I'm thinking of. Footloose is the one. He shows up and he likes to dance, and everybody else in the community he's in thinks it's evil, and he just wants to dance. God damn it!
I just thought they thought he was like a weirdo who just wanted to dance all the time. I was like 9 when I seen all these movies, so they really didn't make sense to me.
Well, it's funny that a movie is such a different way of telling a story than spoken word, like telling a story about something.
Well, it's visual, yeah.
I did find a good quote here. I grew up in Chicago and Aurora, and one of the earliest things I can remember about my fiddle, that my old uncle told me the devil was in the fiddle. He wouldn't let me take lessons. I'm not even gonna.
Interesting.
This is on JSTOR from the Who's Your Folklore Bulletin of 1943. But
yeah, so earlier you had mentioned, I think you said something like that's one of those stories you're working on. Are you doing multiple animations?
yeah, so I did. The one you saw was Shaskalreet, which is about the hunter who, wants to marry the daughter of the local Indian chief, and ends up, having to prove that he's a decent hunter. And he like ends up having several run-ins with large flocks of geese that he can somehow sort of lasso and sometimes hold on to. And then he also ends up finding himself without bullets when he sees a large deer, and so he shoots it with a peach seed, which then grows into a large peach tree a year or two later. And so he's able to kind of bring back all these geese and then this large deer with a peach tree growing out of its head and prove himself, right, to marry the girl. So that's one that's done. And then the other one that I'm working on is the one I told you, the devil. And they're both real masculine, which is a little bit of a problem because not all of the folktales are so male oriented in this community, but those were just two that were really like visually, I thought, interesting. Whereas the ones with a lot of the female characters are, for one thing, I don't have great recordings of them. And then, I mean, they're just less action packed in general,
What do they tend to revolve around?
For instance, there's one, I can't remember them all that well. There's one where a girl's hands get chopped off and the Bible is like enchanted in some way so that the pages will turn for her so she can still read the Bible, even though she doesn't have hands to turn.
That's so sweet.
There's one that I've spent like trying to understand with this poor girl in Canada who's doing her PhD on this topic. And I sent her the recording, like I said, a couple of years ago, just like, please help. She's from Quebec, and so she, speaks a similar version of French to the one that's here, and she couldn't get very far either. But over a couple of years of like listening to this old woman rocking back and forth in her squeaky rocking chair, like that folktale, I think I've pretty much got it. And it's a girl that like she wanted to stay home while her family went to confess. And they said, "You're not going to be afraid?" She said, "No, I won't be afraid." And they said, "Okay, well, why don't you go and get your cousin, Marguerite, and she'll come and stay with you just to keep you company." Because they lived so far from the church, it was like an overnight thing, like if they went to confess. And so she says, "Okay." Well, her cousin comes over and sees a man under the bed. Very good cousin. She doesn't like tell Marie, the protagonist, that there's a guy under your bed. Maybe we should leave. She says, "Oh, I wanted to show you these golden keys. You should come back to my place and I'll show you the golden keys." Well, they don't, she doesn't want to go. It's getting late. It's dark. And so the cousin's like, "I'm out of here. Like, I'm not going to deal with this guy." And so she just leaves her with this guy under the bed. And,
wow.
And of course, it turns out that it's two guys, and they, they jump out and said, "We're here, to steal from everything your dad owns. So get us something to put the gold in." And she says, "Okay, well, I don't have anything down here. I got to go up to the attic." And so she locks herself in the attic, and they try to get in. She has a big butcher knife and like cuts one of the guy's throats whenever he's trying to come in through the window. So he falls to the bottom of the ladder, and then the other guy comes up and she cuts off one of his hands. Well, that's, he can't do much with just one hand. So he runs away and I guess gathers up his buddy. And they're like, "Oh, so how was it? Did you have any problems?" "Oh, no problems at all. Like nothing, no big deal." And,
wow. That's totally like taking ratting out somebody to that family got it packed. Like, I just don't like telling people shit.
I guess, maybe that's it. She doesn't want to confess. She doesn't want to, I've never thought of it that way.
That is interesting. What does that mean about her character? She's like, "I don't need to confess. I could take care of myself." But then honestly, I don't know what the hell I'm doing either.
She's super
independent to a fault, maybe. Oh, maybe not to a fault. 'Cause she got out of it.
Well, kind of, because then like a year or so later, this guy comes around and asks for her hand in marriage, but he's like got one hand behind his back, and she just doesn't trust the guy.
Oh.
And the parents are like, "Look, he's a nice boy. You need to, we're getting older. You don't have any siblings. Like, get on with your life. Like, you should marry him. He's got a nice big house over there.
He's single-handedly the best guy around."
Exactly. She's not going for it.
Wait, does she know that he only has one hand at this point, or she's just curious why he wouldn't show his hand?
Suspicious about that hand, and
right.
I mean, the lady stutters. I lose some of the details, but let's just say she doesn't want to marry him, and she suspects something, but she eventually decides, like, okay, I'll go along with it. What's the worst that could happen? Well, quite a bit, and so she. He brings her home after the wedding, and they get out of the carriage, pass by these large barrels on the way to the door, and he says, "You know what's in that barrel there?" And she says, "No, I have no idea." He says, "There was a guy that was a good friend of mine, and you slit his throat. That's his body's in that barrel." And there's another barrel with his hand in it, and she's like, "Oh, shit, and I gotta get out of here." Well, he takes her into the house, and there's a big pot of water boiling, and he says, "I'm going to boil you alive. When I get back, I got to hitch up, I got to unhitch the horses. Gotta
I'll be right back.
Can you give me a hand?" It's a lot of work.
Yeah. So she has some time, and she hears the voice of the Virgin Mary saying, "Jump out of that tall window. You won't get hurt if you jump, and just go." And so she does, and she hides. And he's livid, and thinks, well, maybe she ran back home. And so he then, with his one hand, hitches up the horses again and tries to drive back to her parents to see if she's back there. But she's watching, from the side of the road. And so she eventually goes back and tells her parents that, this is the guy who tried to steal everything that they owned, and she cut his hand off, and now they're married.
So it's pretty much like, oh, by the way, whenever I said everything was okay, what I really meant was I chopped this dude's hand off and cut up his buddy and put him in a barrel. So that's where we're at now.
No wonder you didn't want to get married. That makes sense now. And so the dad then does go and kill the man. That part I can't understand very well. I think he gets drawn and quartered. They hitch him up to different teams of horses, and he gets pulled to pieces. Yeah, so that one actually would be pretty great to animate, but it's just it's just
back in the day, the movie theater would do midnight showings of Faces of Death.
Oh, really?
Did you ever see that?
No.
I saw it on VHS. I didn't see the screenings. I didn't know they screened it in public. That's crazy.
Yeah, man.
That was like snuff films and shit.
Basically, all it was live recordings of all this different crazy death stuff. So, some of them, it was, military people in what seemed to be like a third world country, just assassinating people. And back then, this is, late 80s. You didn't have, everybody didn't have a camera. So, home movie, it was super surreal. In one of them, tied a dude's arms and legs to 4 different horses and basically just slapped the asses of the horses and tore them apart. It was fucking nuts, dude.
How old were you when you saw that?
Too young.
Probably 9.
Yeah, 10, 9, 10. Go with my sister or my brother to the midnight showing, which wasn't uncommon. We, at least the way I grew up, we experienced probably a lot more than what some people would think would be healthy.
Is appropriate.
Yeah, age appropriate. Right.
Right. Yeah. I feel well adjusted because of it, but I am also pretty desensitized.
Yeah.
Man, Brian, there's a book you may be familiar with, but Ashley Michaud wrote it, I don't know if "wrote's" the right word, but it's called "The Malheureux," like the evil women, I guess it would be translated. And it's transcriptions and I think translations of stories from specifically female writers writing in French in South Louisiana.
Wow, that's awesome.
But it might have some more, just female-centered tales.
That's really good. Yeah.
She's married to Louis Michaud with Lost Bayou Ramblers.
Oh, okay.
They do a lot of interesting things. The UL Press, the University of Louisiana, puts out quite a few interesting books like that. Was Yvette Landry, she's another musician from here, has done a few that are swamp ghost story kind of things. Nice. Like Madame Langdoit and spirits that are kind of typical of the swamp stuff.
What's Langdoit?
Madame Long, with long fingers. She would come out. She'd get you in the woods. Grodot, not Langdoit. I'm sorry. Madame Grodot. That's it. Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. There's I guess somewhat of a collection of people doing just a similar thing with the stories around here, and I'm sure there's a lot of overlap.
I know Barry Onsley has done a lot of work with that too, and it's just a really creative subculture, and I think people are really, I guess, drawn to that sort of story or that sort of music. Like, it's just, you can still become kind of obsessed with it. And so there's like a whole group of people, like you mentioned, that are just really involved and sort of like take it really seriously. And that's fun to see,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's cool. They're looking at, speaking of Barry Onsley right now, he's doing a push to restore the Roy. It's the oldest house on UL's campus.
Oh, wow.
And they're essentially looking to fund restoring the house and making it the Center for Louisiana Studies for the school. He just did a claymation video.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is pretty interesting. He's Barry Onsley as a claymation character. But yeah, it's really neat to see. There was a priest, I think, who essentially noticed that the language was disappearing. And so him and like a group of people kind of committed to just writing down as much as they could, but they weren't linguists so the books are, not exactly, I would say academically usable, or it just wasn't codified quite that way. Yeah. But that's what a lot of the work that they're doing, like with that Louisiana dictionary, like we talked about earlier, that they're kind of doing. It's really kind of taking it serious from a academic perspective, and it's producing some really neat work. I was talking to Becca Begno earlier. She's she's doing a documentary. Essentially, it's kind of representing the healer aspect of the culture. Just how that plays into.
Do you think a lot of that comes from like us kind of mingling with like Native Americans and stuff like that, or do you think that comes before we even got to Louisiana? Because that seems like a very kind of spiritual kind of.
It's a lot of things. It's it's a lot that comes from.
It's almost voodoo kind of.
Some of it is, or some of it's from Santeria, or from the native tribes, or like it's kind of all mixed, really.
But dude, like real traitors,
which to me is what makes it so interesting.
Like real ones, the ones that everybody knows who they are. They don't like charge money. Mr. Obey back in our day. I don't know if you knew him growing up, Jason.
Yeah.
But he was like the traitor of the area. And I tell you what, dude, like you go to him with some warts on your hands and you walk out of there like a day later, your wart's gone. Call that, the power of will or whatever. But there's definitely there's something behind it for sure.
Oh, I would agree. It's one of those things that it's hard to scientifically document, but most people would say that they've had some sort of experience that leads them to, see something in it. I'm not sure where that originally comes from, which culture it originally comes from. Because even the Acadians that came down from Nova Scotia were so intimate with the Mi'kmaq cultures there. So
from France, though, I mean, I think it's definitely like, an imported set of traditions and.
You're saying it did come from France, or it didn't?
No, I don't think so. I think it comes from the cultural exchange, either with the indigenous people here or imported from West Africa, probably part of it too, along with voodoo and
It's interesting that that can all come together under Catholicism. Whatever. Yeah, there you go.
But Catholicism, in some ways, brings a lot of it together because part of their technique or their strategy for assimilating peoples was to adopt aspects of their culture so that it was easy for them to come over, because, hey, we can still do that. We can still celebrate that thing that you're doing. We'll just do it under, the umbrella of our belief structure. But so in a sense, it's hard to say, which side is the leader and follower in there. It's kind of give and take.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up around, Cajun music, Zydeco and stuff, and I've just never really been a fan of it. Still today, it's cool. I definitely respect it for what it is. I'd just rather listen to something else. Or one of the biggest things I regret about not knowing French is like all those songs are basically the same as these folk tales that you're talking about. They're passed on from generation to generation, and I don't speak French, so I don't know what they're saying, but that's why I regret not knowing French, because I'm sure there's a plethora of information and just, cool shit to kind of think about.
So I got something to trip you out. The belief structure in a lot of these different groups is that your ancestors are trying to communicate with you at all times and trying to guide you through your day. So what if your ancestors speak French and you don't?
I think you still understand. Or he's Kanai. That one over there is Kanai. I bet you still know what that is. Go give me a switch. Go give me a switch.
Yeah. It's weird. I think, have we talked about this, Brandon, where like I didn't know that I was descended from French people when I started that project or when I started learning French. Like,
yeah,
I think but you feel drawn to certain things, and then like, I don't know. I do think that there is something about what you just said about ancestors kind of always having something to say. and maybe it's an epigenetic thing. Maybe it's just happenstance. Like, it's just really hard to say, but
it's like in the bones.
Well, if we think about time, like in the way that like we probably don't think about time, and what I mean is like we think of it as linear, what everything advanced seems to suggest it's not. And that kind of changes the way that all of those things could be existing, so if there is no linear time, everything is coexisting, then all of that stuff is still here, overlapped with us in some kind of way. Yeah. And whether or not we can access it or recognize it somewhat depends on what we allow ourselves to be receptive to, maybe.
Yeah. No, I totally dig that. Well, and the counter, but supporting that, I think, is like the ship of Theseus, like where you can rebuild, like your body rebuilds itself completely over every 7 years, but you're still you. So it's like that also kind of lends a weird support to that idea, is that, well, obviously you don't have to actually be a person.
You're not yourself somehow.
Yeah, you don't have to be. You don't have to be physically you, and you're not in a certain way. That's weird.
Well, yeah, because I mean, your body, like you said, changes itself every 7 years, but matter isn't destroyed, and so like you don't like see like your skin shedding off or whatever. But you talk about like a non-linear timeline and quantum mechanics and physics, where we're existing in all these timelines at the same time.
Right.
Yeah. It's rad. I mean, that's the most I could do with it. It's rad because I don't understand it.
Going what you said, Brian, about not realizing that you had French ancestry and things. I had similar in that, like growing up, we got MTV when I was 8 or 9 years old, and I like hardcore like grabbed onto that, like most of us did, right? Like it was like everything that I would see, it was old time French stuff or old time Cajun stuff.
For 2 weeks until the cable company took it off.
Right,
of there.
it wasn't around for long, but it was enough to attract my
make
attention
an impact,
to make
sure.
me or adopt that worldview. Right? And then eventually over time, I started to realize that whenever I would hear some of these old songs or hear some of these, it was the music really that did it to me. It was like there was something in it that it was the thing that I was trying to find
just
in the
resonated with you.
Right.
And
it doesn't exist really in the MTV world,
It's the image only. Yeah.
No, it probably doesn't exist anywhere the way you see it. You just happen to see a version of it that you associated with it, where that could have been the same thing if you were watching CMT.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
You just happen to see this one piece of it.
Right.
Kind of like we were talking, a couple of weeks ago in like arguments where you kind of grasp on to like one general idea of a person or their personality, and like all of a sudden it becomes like the whole thing, the whole person, you know?
Right.
Yeah. You can have them in a certain way, but you actually don't get anything of them. Because you could say, "Oh, I know that person. I know done. I know it."
I know what they would think
Oh
about
yeah, I've seen that before. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Chad, I think you can. I don't think you need to mourn your like loss of connection to that music.
Oh, I don't.
Yeah.
I would just be cool to like understand the songs. I'm like coon asses could be. At least my family is, and so just being that ingrained historically, I guess, just to be able to know what the stories they're talking about would be interesting.
There's a good disc you can get called Louisiana Cajun and Creole Music.
I see them at every shop, right? Yep, pass them up every day.
Recordings have translations of like most of the major traditional songs. Like you'll get.
I didn't know that. Okay.
There's the Mardi Gras song. There's the Waltz of the Bamboucheur. There's like Hackberry Hop. And it's all in French and then in English in the liner notes. So there's like a.
That's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you can just read it and not have to subject your ears.
There you go.
I mean, look, I don't like hate it. I hate country music. I don't hate like Zydeco and stuff. I mean, the thing is, if you're listening to Zydeco, chances are, people are dancing and having a good time. So it's hard to like hate that situation. It's just not usually the first thing that I put on my radio, I definitely see the value and all the history that comes with it.
But I think too that's like it's a functional music in a sense. At least a lot of the
it brings people together, celebration and mourning.
And it's a dance thing, right? So it's like they call that chanka chank because of the tendency of an accordion or a washboard to chanka 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 chanka, and that's all you hear, right?
That march kind of.
Yeah, but it's like if you're in a big room full of people stomping, you need an instrument and. Again, no amplification or anything. Yeah. You need an instrument and a sound that's going to cut, that's going to keep everybody in time. So you'll see like Boisek Ardouin, he played accordion, but he'd stomp his foot. It's the percussion section, him stomping his foot throughout the whole song. But if you're like driving...
Is that why you do that?
Me?
Yeah, I've noticed whenever you're sitting and playing, you definitely got your foot stomping.
Yeah, no, I tend to try to do that. I just try to move because... To me, it's like if your body's moving in time, then you have to be in rhythm. But just to say, like, so I remember we went to a fundraiser not too long ago, and it was like 5 Cajun groups at the Hyman Center, which is a big, nice theater. But it's 5 hours of sitting down listening to Cajun music, and it was it was very not.
Man, 5 hours listening to any performance, that's.
Yeah,
but
it's like music meant to dance. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. Which going back to what I was saying about like listening to it when you in your car or whatever. But it's like that's really the wrong music for the situation kind of.
Well, that makes a lot of sense because just about every time that I am around the music, it's usually festivals.
Right, that's it.
And it makes sense there. It's like, oh yeah.
And like I said, I don't hate it. I don't,
it's just kind of thinking it's like if you're driving around, you have the wedding march in your car just to do it. It's just odd.
Right.
Like taps.
But it's like Brian had said earlier about being able to take these stories, and like weave these stories together in such a way that you can keep everybody entertained all night long. That's kind of that's kind of the thing with the music too. It's like it's Friday night, it's Saturday night, it's when probably Saturday night, but. It's like, what else is there to do?
Go to the Fiddle.
And somebody plays music all night and everybody dances and drinks wine all night,
Yeah.
So, Jason, you play like rock and blues and other styles too, right? Predominantly, like that was what you started being.
Kind of what I began with, yeah.
Yeah, and then you migrated to Cajun music?
Well, I kind of, with my own stuff, like with what I'm writing and kind of the original music I do, it's kind of been a transition, kind of still staying in rock and blues, but kind of incorporating that chanka chank.
Oh, nice.
Chord thing going, I finally realized that like when I play my guitar, I tend to play pretty percussively, and I always have, and that's what kind of, I don't remember how it came about, but essentially I realized that what I was trying to get at was that chank-a-chank washboard kind of rhythm kind of thing. And so once I kind of accepted that that's what I was doing and that wasn't just, old-timey, nonsense or whatever, then it's like it was a lot easier just to use it and appreciate it a little more.
The practical aspect of it.
Yeah. But I've joined a couple like just to learn the catalog and stuff. Played with other bands and things to where get in there and learn the songs a little more, and just learn different aspects of it. And I started playing fiddle about 10 years ago, and it really kind of opened up some different things too. It just for whatever reason, it was like when I started playing it, it just felt like very natural, I guess.
It's tuned differently, so I think it does open up new possibilities just under your fingers, like for coming up with melodies. And I could imagine that being really helpful, like if you're writing songs, to just have another thing that you can use for a foundation,
Did you play also, Brian?
No, I don't play fiddle, but I played piano and then picked up guitar when I went to college. And so it's kind of the same thing. It's like it's just a completely different way of thinking about the same stuff, like two systems.
Right, learning a different language.
Now, whenever you talk about ragtime, what's the, like me and Chad were talking about that. I told him that you used to play ragtime, and he's like, what is that? And I was like, I don't know.
Like, I definitely know, like, I've heard it, but, like, whenever I hear the word ragtime, I just think back to, like, was it Spaceballs? And, like, the guy comes flying out his chest, and he's like, hello, my lady, hello, my darling, hello, my ragtime gal. Like, that's the only thing I can think of when I hear the word ragtime. Like,
not a bad image to have, honestly.
It was a great scene.
Predominantly performed by small frogs, and it...
Little hat.
Not just any frogs, small frogs.
Right.
You, in the fifth grade at Moe Elementary, we had to do these dances one year, and our class did
like
the
square dance shit, right?
Yeah, we did the Charleston.
Okay.
That's a ragtime dance, isn't it, I think?
Yeah. Okay. You'd have to spit me the melody because, like, I remember the name.
It's more of a rhythm, really. Like, the melody can kind of be anything, but it's just sort of like this da 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 da.
Like
it's
a
just
waltz?
like having those two regular beats that are sort of offbeat at the same time. Like, they come it's not always the same place in the bar, right? So it seems exciting even though it's just two.
Well, right, because you're not always landing on, like, 1 and 2 or always on the downbeat.
Yeah, shifts around, and so it's fun to dance to. But the ragtime was that it's basically a combination of a lot of things, kind of like the culture we've been talking about all along. Like, it developed in America because you needed to have this mix of music that we have here in the Midwest, right? In like the 1890s is when it really took off, but it probably was developing a lot earlier, like right after the Civil War, because it incorporates a lot of that military march rhythm, So like brass bands were really popular. And it was like everything was in 4, and it was, you can think of like Stars and Stripes Forever.
All of a sudden, all these people had instruments.
Right. And then so you got that going on, this really regular marching, and then you've got African Americans, their rhythms that they've developed, over the years. And you can think of what was going on in Congo Square in New Orleans, where you've got people who were brought over here as slaves, but were able to get together and dance on Sundays and preserve their traditional rhythms. That happened, of course, all over the country. And so you have African syncopated rhythms mixing with this steady march beat. And it just makes a weird combination of...
It kind of throws your body kind of, gently, but all over the place.
Makes you want to dance. Because you've got a strong beat to dance to, but then there's interesting stuff going on. The major composer that everyone knows is Scott Joplin. And he was actually born in Texarkana, but then moved up to Missouri at a young age, and played. It was mainly played by black men, usually young men. It was kind of like hip hop of the day. Like you would hear it in clubs. It was really popular in saloons and brothels, and it was really popular in railroad towns because there was a lot of people coming through and they wanted to have a good time when they were there.
Well, that's funny that you say that because, Brandon and I were talking about it, and that was kind of the other, I guess, idea about what it is, like, a saloon, people kind of hooting and hollering and drinking, and, you get this guy just playing a semi-fast beat on the piano and, just having fun or whatever. But I got Spotify, so I'm going to check out just Spotify Ragtime and see what pops up. Is there any, top 40s that I can look up? Or
Yeah. So most of them died, obviously, before recording technology was really ready to get a good performance. But there were a couple that survived.
But, did it all die with them?
No, it just developed into other things. So, the blues and jazz both came out of ragtime. It just developed into new, exciting things. I think it's kind of frustrating, for a lot of the composers was, being limited to those places to perform. Yubi Blake is the guy that survived, right? And he was about 100 when he died. So there are good recordings. You can listen to him. And I have some interviews with him talking about he would sneak out of his house when he was 13. He was growing up in Baltimore. He was a good piano player, but his parents didn't approve of ragtime. They thought it was the devil's music. So he would sneak out and he would play in a brothel when he was a young kid. He had to borrow someone's long pants to get to play.
Wow.
And he hated it. He thought it was just, it was demeaning, and he hated the work, right? You would have to sit and if someone paid a lot of money, there would be a screen, I think, where the pianist would sit, and you could kind of play in time with the actual sex act.
Wow.
And so
did he not like ragtime, or did he not like having to play ragtime for the circumstances?
He didn't like the circumstances, but he loved the music. He ended up getting caught because one of the neighbors recognized him from the sound of his playing, because very good.
It's like, hey, what are you doing here at this brothel?
Right.
Hey, what are you doing here at this brothel? I think we both got to remain quiet.
He was making so much money. He was the breadwinner for that family. He was making a ton of money. And the same thing's true for Jelly Roll Morton, who was down in Louisiana and in New Orleans, Shreveport. You could kind of hustle, it was if you were a good pool player, there were competitions and you could win a lot of money and you could earn a lot of money. If you had a reputation. And Jelly Roll Morton's kind of the link between ragtime and jazz. So you can listen to him too, and he's really good. But that happened in New Orleans. So I don't know. It's interesting music. Scott Joplin was a very serious guy and wanted to be considered a classical music composer in that tradition. He wrote an opera called Treemonisha. But he was black in the early 1900s, late 1800s, and there was just no way for him to get that kind of respect.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. And it was appropriated by white people who just played fast and loud music, But
I forget the name of that. There's a jazz band out of New Orleans that's credited with the first jazz recording, and it's 5 white guys from Boston.
Yeah. It's the original Dixieland Jazz Band.
That's them, yeah.
Yeah. And
they made a
Are they
film
serious? They really think they can claim that?
They stole a song from a composer named Joe Jordan, who was black, and his song was called That Teasin' Rag. And That Teasin' Rag is a really good composition, and they just stole it, right? And simplified it and played it fast and recorded it.
As the stories go, that's basically what they claim Elvis and them did because black people just weren't allowed on stage. But you had these terrifically talented people, and then, the white people would see them and literally take it and go make money off of it.
The issue is that the major radio stations would only play the white artists. So they would essentially just re-record the same songs,
Yeah.
And that went on for forever, I guess, but definitely into the 60s.
Yeah.
So is that why, kind of shifting a little bit of genre, but is that why Jefferson Starship and stuff like that, like in the 60s. Is that why that was a big break for them? Is because for the first time they could just be black on stage and that was okay? Or?
Well, like Motown was like a big push in that, in the 50s in putting black stars, both male and female, as like the headliner.
The issue though was still that they couldn't get it played on white radio.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. They wouldn't just cross over into that. I mean, I guess by Motown they started to, but a little prior to that.
Yeah.
I'm sure they didn't get a great deal. The first time they start dealing with record companies, I'm sure it's not a wonderful deal.
Oh, right.
Well, I mean, that's probably
not that it is anyway.
Still today, right?
Right. Yeah.
I was watching Joe Rogan, I don't know, a few days ago. Darren Rollins, that other comedian, he was on the Chappelle show. They were just kind of talking about, how Hollywood's just been pretty much going to shit and they don't need it anymore. Like Joe moved to Texas and, everybody's kind of moving out of LA. And he said, in today's world, especially now that we've experienced COVID and, we've quickly adopted these video mediums that we're doing right now. There's no need for that, like, middleman, that Hollywood man anymore. Like, you create your own audience, and that's kind of where things are heading. I think it's super cool.
Yeah, democratization.
Right.
It's literally, voting with your support and your dollar. I think you have something worth listening to, and so I will pay you with my attention.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think they've become so conservative in Hollywood that something has to happen because we can't just have a new Avengers movie every summer. Like, well, we can and we have been, but
right.
Well, yeah, but like in 10 years, what are they going to be? They won't have anything to remake. Like everything will be remade 9 times.
I mean, I just watched the most recent Star Wars a couple nights ago because I was so mad that they brought the Emperor back that I just refused to see it in theaters. But sorry.
Hey man, I feel
it's ridiculous. It's like, who is writing these things and how are they getting millions and millions of dollars?
The marketing department
to produce this shit?
Of course, we say that.
That's their angle,
But there was 500 years of Little Johnny stories. Right?
I know, yeah, I know. Yeah,
that is funny though. That is funny. But then there's a different bar there too. It's like
there was no money made off of Little Johnny.
Well, that depends how you look at it too. Yeah. I think though a good part of it is like with new characters that nobody's familiar with. You have a lot of work to do to reintroduce all those characters in a setting that nobody's familiar with. You have a lot of work to do to. So you end up with these pieces where it's like, that's the dig on Lord of the Rings, right? Is it's all setting development. You got to read 15 pages that describe what it looks like. Well, if I'm already coming to your piece of work and I already know the personalities of all the characters, you could just jump right in and start, telling a story.
Oh, I totally get why they do it. I mean, dude, you're spending $300 million on, one project. You probably want to make it the safest bet possible. You know what I mean? Like, want to go with what's proven. But, I think that's where you got to just be like, well, maybe we don't need to spend $300 million. Maybe we can make something different.
I just mean in terms of like even just creative output, though, because like you don't have to create the character. You have a character to work with.
But that's such a huge part of the cinema, too, is developing new worlds like that, I
was going to say, that just sounds lazy to me, but...
Yeah, that's what I mean. There's a certain, it's more efficient to work with stock characters, but I think you could make an argument that, A New Hope in 77 was using stock characters. Like Obi-Wan Kenobi is just Merlin and space.
Well, right, yeah.
Right.
We got our 12 archetypes, and, essentially
exactly.
dealing with them.
But it's still way more interesting.
But those are just guides that you're able to develop stuff around. It's not defined characters. It's just a broad characteristics.
Right, yeah.
It's funny, though. If I just hear Bujo and Thibodeau that's enough. I'm already, I already know. I'm like, okay, Bujo and Thibodeau are they in a boat this time? Are they, where they going?
Somebody's going to fucking
go. It's like Ren and Stimpy. Ren and Stimpy walk down the street. It's like, oh shit, this is going to be funny. Ren and Stimpy are crazy.
Like talking to a director, like directing theatrical plays, they say one of the things that's crucial, whether you're storytelling or presenting any kind of a piece like that, is to understand the history and the expectations of the genre, because so much is done right away just like that, because the viewer is going to jump in and instantly start making assumptions about everything they're seeing. So as soon as my character's name's Little Johnny something, right,
it's
then
relatable.
it's automatically going to draw all these associations out. It's one thing to use that, but it's like if you're not aware, that's when it's like you're not aware of the associations that you're jumping into, or the expectations.
You just have a movie filled with these random associations that doesn't make it for good cinema, no matter how much it stimulates you.
Right, but I guess I'm thinking like we were talking about folktales earlier, word of mouth folktales. But whether it's word of mouth folktales or songs or poems or movies, I guess that's the thing about it being. Each one of those is just a different, medium for communicating something.
I mean, I'm a visual artist. To me, there's something different about like visual art, like seeing a movie or hearing a story. Or even looking at a painting. Like, to me, a movie, it's not negative or positive. It's different. It's almost like a movie kind of directs me more. You know what I mean? Or tells me more.
Tells you what
I don't have to work as hard to get it. And I think, there's something in that that just makes it different from like I said, telling a story or something. Again, not that it's negative or positive. There's just some kind of difference.
You cater your delivery to the medium. So, like, if it's a visual medium, you're gonna have characters that are huge and beautiful and all this stuff. But they don't need to be that specifically, explicitly beautiful or whatever. If it's written, you can allude to it. But that's what I like about That's what I like about that one. Is it's got the actual archival, gritty storytelling, like from the person who's speaking it, and then you have the animation as well. So, and the animation's beautiful. It's just wonderful with it. But you get both. You kind of get this nice, and the interesting thing for me as somebody who doesn't understand the language is I get to see the language, even though I can't understand the language. Mm-hmm. But I can still hear the language and hear the emotion of the person, and I can hear them saying, like, when they repeat words a lot, and they'll say like, oh, he's running, he's eating the peach, he's doing, and like I get the sense of what he's doing. It's beautiful. It's really interesting.
You're like associating the words with the actions.
Yeah. It's really well done. I like that.
When I started, so it's good to hear that, because I thought, like, I've sent this to people in France and they can't follow it any better than you, right? Like, it's just like it's just an accent that's hard to get into, if you're not used to it. And so I thought, it is a good way, I think, to make those connections without having to like sit down and like feel like you're doing homework, like you can kind of get a sense of what the stories were like. And I think something that was important that happened too was like realizing, okay, like at some point, like I'm making a fucking animation. I just got to get away from this guy who like never shuts up, like telling the story, like a moment where like he takes a breath and I can just do my own thing for a while, and then, so that was kind of something that I hope to do a little bit more of too, like have a bit more of like a give and take between the visuals and the actual spoken story.
How many are you planning on making? So you said you've been working on it for like 6 years?
For 4 years, but I
mean, that's like research and stuff too. I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's a lot of research. Like that animation I started last year in the summer, so it's been like 18 months and I've been teaching and had like a bout of tendinitis where I didn't really work. So it probably is about a year's worth of work.
I mean, that's significant, impressive. Like in the grand scheme of the big project, like what do you see the final looking like?
I see a couple of those folktales, the two that I kind of went through with you guys. They'll be animated, and I'm probably going to cut the one with Big Devil and Little John down pretty significantly, because if I don't have a recording of it, but if I read it, just out loud, it takes about 15 minutes probably. That's just too much, time to animate. Yeah. So it'll get edited. And then there's a lot of video, interviews with people from the area. I shot footage of La Guillonnée, so the New Year's Eve thing is going to be in there. One thing I really want to do is there's this tradition of having bouillon parties where someone would go and steal a neighbor's chicken, boil the chicken, to make a soup. The rules of the game are you absolutely have to invite the person whose chicken you've stolen to the party.
That sounds like some shit my friends would do.
Right. But it was a tradition that kept people families together. It was just a fun thing to do, and then obviously you invite them over when you kill their chicken, and serve it. And so people would dance and play music and play cards and eat this chicken. And that's not really done so often, but a guy I know there, Kent Bone, is like, he's got his own chickens. He doesn't mind, recreating this, this tradition.
Like live action?
Yeah, so I think, I was like, I want to follow you around stealing someone's chicken, and we can invite them over and see how it goes.
The Mardi Gras run, the Cudita Mardi Gras, it's, they go from house to house begging for, food, and essentially the tradition is to, collect all these different things, take it all down to the last house and cook a big, gumbo or cook a big whatever it might be. But that's, but it's exactly that. Then everybody contributed to it. Everybody comes and it's a big gathering.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like something socialist or something, huh? Like kind of a socialist communism.
No, but I mean, a lot of it is kind of that way. It's like, it is that community mindset, right? Where like, I'm going to steal one of your chickens. You'll take one of mine. Like, it's all fine. Like, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, we're better together.
Well, it's almost like, like, yeah, I'm stealing your chicken, but it's really just like picking at you. And like, if I'm picking at you, that means I love you as family. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like,
and like, if you just told people like, oh, I'm going to have a bouillon, like at my place, come on over. Like, they might not come, but if it's their own chicken that they love, like, you're kind of forcing their hand. Like, you got to show up and eat that chicken. Or
that's skin in the game, man.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you got to plan, how you're going to get their chicken.
Right.
You got to do some reconnaissance.
Yeah.
Well, man, is there any place online or anywhere can anybody check it out?
That is going to be up in the air for a bit because I'm applying for film festivals, and so they can't be publicly available.
Okay.
Be shown in a festival. But hopefully next year in 21, it'll come to a city near you. And if it doesn't, then just be patient and it'll be up online.
Stories have been waiting for 140 years to be told.
It'll be just hang in there a little bit longer. The Old Mines area has a historical society. If you're interested, you can buy books about the French there or the different families that have settled in the area. And then there's also sort of a rival group which has oldmines.org. There's a little bit of a turf war over all of this. But
well, if you do make it into a festival, you'll have to come back on the podcast and tell us what it's like to go to a movie festival. That's going to be awesome.
Thanks.
Well, man, I think that's probably about all the time we got for today. You guys have anything else you wanted to talk about on the Cajun culture?
No, I don't think so.
No. Thanks for having me, guys. It's been fun.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming out, and we'll definitely do it again, brother.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right. Yeah, take it easy.
Yep, later.
Later. Thanks for listening to Armchair Radio. We release a new podcast every Tuesday, so please click that follow button so you can hear what we talk about next. If you're interested in any of the topics that we've covered, check out our website, armchairradiopodcast.com, where we have links to everything in our show notes. And if you've enjoyed the show, please share with your friends. We're available on iTunes, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts exist. Thanks again for listening, and hope to see you next time.